Katerina Yaka watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Yaka saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review for February 11th, 2021. Wow, already into February. Man, my birthday's next week. I'm going to be 67 years old. that kills me. I never thought I'd reach that age, but we'll see how much farther I get. In the meantime, I'm Chris Driscoll, and along with me is Rainer Shea. Rainer, how are you tonight? Today, whenever you're listening.
I've been thinking about Jimmy Dore and how to view him. Like after what happened with the Boogaloo Boys, where he uncritically repeated their claims of being aligned with the left.
Yeah,
I feel like it brought some
defending
issues
BLM. Defending BLM.
Yeah.
That was the claim.
Yeah. Jimmy Dore has really been a notable part of our political scene lately with his taking the squad to task, which he was right to do.
Yeah.
And then after this crisis with the MAGA people storming the Capitol happens, he was confronted with the decision: do I disavow the MAGA side, or do I start cozying up to whichever part of that side is willing to be friendly with me and pretend they're on my side? And he made a choice that is significant given our current climate of rising fascism and rising threats of violence from right-wing paramilitary organizations.
Yeah. I don't much agree with Jimmy on that, on the whole idea of right-left coalition, or that the idea that, some of these militias within the Boogaloo Boys are actually pro-working class in any way. However, some of them are made up. Much of, or at least in some parts of working class people. I think probably more the aristocracy of labor than the industrial heart of labor. Yeah, it is true that some of those militias did stand and defend BLM, and I think they did that as a tactic, to try to win over BLM forces, because they looked and they saw, well, we're anti-police state, they're anti-police state, so we have something in common. So at least they were reaching out in that way. I don't see a lot of value in a right-left coalition. The Boogaloo Boys, I've looked into this, and the Boogaloo Boys are quite a bit different from, say, what's that other group of nuts that are very...
Proud Boys.
The Proud Boys, yes. From the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys are avowedly fascist. Whereas at least so several large Jewish groups say that they are not fascist, that they are not anti-Semitic or racist per se, that's not their focus. That is, some of the Boogaloo Boy militias are that way. I think Jimmy was talking specifically about a group that's in Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken, which is a little bit more progressive state than most are. My mother's from Minnesota, so I know it pretty well. And I've had many good friends who live there. So, yeah, it's not quite the same thing as dealing with the outright fascists. And in principle, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to working class people who are involved in that. We certainly agree with the idea that being armed in this day and age, and armed militias in this day and age, is a damn good idea for all working class people in this country. However, on balance, while I won't condemn Jimmy for what he was saying, he had this guy, one of the militia guys on there, who was quite unoffensive. I mean, he was not racist in any way. He claimed to be an anarchist, although he was like one of these, I think he was one of these right-wing,
and caps.
That's what they call them. I'm trying to think of the word. Is capitalist supporting, libertarian, basically. He's more of a libertarian than an anarchist, but he called himself an anarchist. He was not offensive in any way. Although I would not seek him out first. I mean, if I was going to seek out, which I will and have done, if I were to seek out anarchists to block with, they would be socialist anarchists first and foremost, which is, 90% of anarchists are socialists. Utopian socialists, but nonetheless they're socialists. So we have something in common. They're a legitimate traditional part of the working class movement worldwide, although not the best part and not the part that the working class really needs. We can work with them on some occasions and some types of coalitions with these right-wing types. And this guy was, in my opinion, right-wing, differing from Jimmy. I think Jimmy has this idea that my old mentor and boss, Ralph Nader, always had. I mean, he's had it for like 50 years of right-left coalitions, and very similar to the ideas that Caleb Maupin, our friend Caleb, who's been on this show a few times, puts out this idea of reaching out to, I think they overemphasize the idea of how many working class people are in that category. Statistics show, and this is long term, for as long as I've been looking at these statistics, for the last 50, 55 years at least, the statistics show that about 1/3 of the entire working class leans on occasion towards that right wing kind of, they call it populist, but it's not populist. It's more fascist than populist. That's the danger, because these are some of the people who end up forming fascist upsurges, fascist groups. So yeah, I mean, I think that that's dangerous myself, and I would steer clear of it, and I would urge Jimmy to steer clear of it. I don't think Jimmy is an enemy or whatnot. He's a comedian, very funny comedian, and he has some really good gut reactions. But in this case, I think he's barking up the wrong tree, just like I think that our friend Caleb Maupin is barking up the wrong tree with this idea. We need to focus on, the other 2/3 of the working class, which is definitely socialist, definitely listening to ideas about socialism, interested in socialism, knows that socialism is the answer. They don't quite know that revolutionary socialism is the answer. A lot of them have been, swayed by the social democrat side of socialism, which is, some people would call it fake socialism, but I'm just going by historic trends, and by historic trends, social democracy is part of the Marxist working class, or was at one time part of the Marxist working class movement. And in the tradition of working class political parties and working class unions and working class movements. So yeah, I'd steer clear. We've got a fuckload of work to do on winning the socialist wing, which is 2/3 of the working class, over to revolutionary socialism. Fuck the right wing. They're gonna, we don't need them. If the great majority, 2/3 is the great majority. If the great majority of the working class is with us, we'll win. Along with, others in the middle class and from the poor who are also attracted to our views. So those are my views on it. I guess I've gone on way too long on this. I spent 12 minutes talking about this. But anyway, any more on that before we move on? I wanted to launch into the agenda that we have tonight.
No.
And I think this agenda is pretty important this time around. There's some really interesting stuff here. First on the list is liberal-imperialist think tank, The Atlantic, and I should mention globalist. I should say liberal-imperialist globalist think tank, The Atlantic Council, calls for U.S. regime change war against China. Now, this is astounding. This is a very important, influential liberal think tank in Washington, D.C., and it is the basically it's funded by European and the United States government, European governments, along with, and it gets a lot of its funding from how would we put, from the Gulf, from the Gulf dictatorships. Let's say the dictatorships of the Gulf, of the Persian Gulf region, Arabic right-wing reactionary dictatorships. Anyway, in an article in Mint Press, mintpressnews.com, entitled Atlantic Council Pens Anonymously Authored Expose Calling for Regime Change in China. Alan McLeod, who's we've mentioned his articles before, he says, I'll just begin here and read you a few clips of this. Influential DC think tank Atlantic Council has printed a 26,000 word report laying out its strategy for combating China. Published anonymously, the report states that the single most important challenge facing the United States in the 21st century is China's growth to rival their own power. To do so, the report states, the U.S. must use the power of its military, the dollar's role as global reserve currency, and American control over technology and communication to suffocate the nation of 1.4 billion people. It advises President Biden to draw a number of red lines past which the U.S. would directly intervene, presumably militarily. These include China's attempt to expand into the South China Sea, an attack on the disputed Senkaku Islands, or moves against Taiwan's independence. A North Korean strike on any of its neighbors would also necessitate an American response against China, the report insists, because China must fully own responsibility for the behavior of its North Korean ally. Any backing down from this stance, the Council states, would result in national humiliation for the United States. National humiliation. Perhaps most notably, however, the report also envisions what a successful American-China policy would look like by 2050. The United States and its major allies continue to dominate the region. This is a quote from the report. Continue to dominate the regional and global balance of power across all major indices of power. That's their, strategic dominance overall in land, sea, air, and in space. That the head of state, Xi Jinping, has been replaced by a more moderate party leadership, and that the Chinese people themselves have come to question and challenge the Communist Party's century-long proposition that China's ancient civilization is forever destined to an authoritarian future. In other words, that China has been broken and that some sort of regime change has occurred. So, yeah, this report, it's astounding in many ways, but essentially, I mean, if you follow the logic of it, this crazy thing is calling for nuclear holocaust. It's calling for risking nuclear holocaust that would destroy all of humanity for the purpose of browbeating and bullying China into a new regime, essentially. It's quite astounding, really disturbing, I find. I mean, this Atlantic Council, it's had in the past, it's had many people from both the Democrat and Republican parties who have gone directly out of Democrat and Republican administrations, as they call it. I call it regimes, right into the Atlantic Council. And several of the people that Biden's picked to be in his cabinet come out of the Atlantic Council. So there's a real incestuous relationship. The Democrats traditionally more than the Republicans have supported it. The Democrats being the more globalist of the two parties. So it's quite disturbing that they are pushing Joe Biden into this idea of red lines.
Red lines. It sounds like they're looking for qualifiers, excuses, you could say, to carry out a series of aggressions against China. And it sounds like a nuclear strike against the PRC or against some territory that's surrounding the PRC or is allied with the PRC is entailed within this. You know, this does reflect the tactics that U.S. imperialism carried out to defeat the Soviet Union. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were about intimidating the USSR by showing that Washington was serious about using the bomb. And this long-term plan that the Atlantic Council envisions, where the PRC has been reduced to something more subdued, and they call this idealistic future leader a more moderate leader compared to Xi Jinping. It sounds like they want to do the same thing in China that they did in the Soviet Union, which is help push through the rise of revisionist leaders within the Communist Party, within the ruling party, who work to degrade the dictatorship of the proletariat and therefore allow for a coup to take place, for the imperialists to get someone like Gorbachev to dismantle the structure entirely. This is hinted at in the council's language about how around 2050, when this moderate government is in place, the masses will be able to challenge the Communist Party's continued dominance over the government. So it sounds like what they envision for 2050 is a situation where a revisionist government has been installed, which will allow for China to then be dismantled and perhaps balkanized, turned into a series of avenues for the imperialists to carve up and exploit.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, I know. I sent you this article earlier on when it came out, and I noticed you had already been chatting and talking to people about it and alerted people about it. So you were ahead of me on this. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Next on the list, the U.S. is slowly becoming more isolated by Rainer Shea.
This article is a response to an essay from last August by the socialist columnist Ben Hillier, who 6 months ago reasonably worried about the idea of U.S. imperialism making a comeback after the losses that it's experienced in these last couple of decades. Hillier worried that U.S. hegemony could emerge within a growing anti-China geopolitical bloc. Basically, that Washington, with the help of many other wealthy powers, could force the PRC into submission through a campaign of economic strangulation. He worried that the PRC has become so deeply integrated into the global economy that a successful effort by Washington to lead an economic warfare coalition against China would effectively cripple China's economy and make it so that Washington succeeds in subduing China. And in these last 6 months, I think a lot has changed to make it apparent that Hillier's worries about Washington making a comeback, about Washington succeeding in its economic war against China, a lot of things have come about to make it unfeasible for Washington to carry this out. Firstly, in November, I think in November it was that 15 Asia Pacific countries signed onto an historic trade deal with China that made it so that tariffs between these countries were lowered. And also I think it was in December it was just last month that China reached a deal with the EU to make trade between these countries more functional and to put in place parameters on Chinese state-owned companies while functioning within Europe. So these compromises between these powers have been made. Washington's imperial allies, including Australia, which is for the most part signed on to Washington's economic war against China, these countries have been working towards cooperating increasingly with China towards reaching compromises. And I think this has made it apparent that there's not going to be this huge betrayal on the part of most wealthy countries in the world against China. I think that they're not going to do something so drastic as to go along with Washington's crazy plan to crush China, because obviously China is a rising power and it's in the best interest of these countries to leave it alone. And another thing that Hillier argued was that since the U.S. remains the dominant force in international finance, the U.S. theoretically has the ability to financially crush China. This was indicated in that Atlantic Council report, which recommended the U.S. using its power over finance capital to strangulate China. The thing is, it seems like pretty soon the U.S. is going to have its finance domination diminished, because as we've discussed previously on this show, there are increasing indications that the dollar is going to experience a major fall in value within this next year. We've talked about the predictions of the economist Stephen Roach, who predicts that by the end of 2021, the dollar will have decreased in value by around 35%. And I think it's increasingly apparent that such a scenario is in store because, well, the dollar has experienced a slump as of late, and as U.S. GDP has obviously declined massively, the Chinese yuan has at the same time been experiencing an uptick. So given these trends, I don't think U.S. finance domination is going to last too much longer. It's for these reasons that Washington's hopes for doing to China what it did to the USSR aren't really present, despite what the Atlantic Council wants. And it's for these reasons that Washington is going to only become more economically isolated. And now we're seeing what happens when capitalism can't expand. The foundations of its economy fall out. It increases austerity, privatization, wage cuts against it, the people within the core of imperialism. I'm trying to explain something pretty complicated, but I think you see what I mean. we're in a situation where the U.S. capitalism isn't able to expand, so imperialism is turning inwards, and the contradictions of capitalism are getting furthered, and the intensification of class struggle is inevitably going to intensify because of this.
Yes, well put. When I was reading this article, I think you made pretty much the right points. This is still a dangerous animal, as we keep saying. This U.S. empire is able to inflict a lot of damage in the world, and the more desperate they become, the more damage they will attempt to inflict. I was struck reading your figures for how much of reserve currency now in the world is the American dollar. And I think most people would probably read that in an ahistorical way. They would look at it and say, wow, 60%. The Americans control 60% of all the money that's used for trade throughout the world. That's really powerful. And yes, it is very powerful. However, I look at it in a historic way. When not too long ago, 20 years ago, that figure was more like 80 to 90%. So the U.S. has fallen drastically over the last 2 decades. The U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. I mean, at one point there was a total hegemony, and pretty much only the U.S. dollar was used in international trade. And they had this whole SWIFT system set up. They still have it set up. That was basically at that time the only bank, you could call it, exchange, international exchange that through which people could trade, and they dealt in dollars. They still deal in dollars. The difference now is that Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, many other countries have set up alternative exchanges that use other currencies. So the power of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency has tumbled tremendously already. I think we're going to see a huge tumbling in the near future because of these countries that the United States continuously sanctions and carries out economic sabotage against are starting to get smart and get together and say, fuck this, we're big enough to create our own international currency exchanges and trade with our own currencies. And China more and more does that with all the 100+ countries it trades with. Russia does that with dozens and dozens of countries. So we've already seen a real tumble, and that's part of the reason that Marxist analysts, see this great decline in the power, in the hegemony of the American empire. So anyway, job well done. Great article too, by the way. Next on our list, did you have anything else to add? I don't want to step on your toes. Okay, but next on the list, Russia's Sergei Lavrov, who's the foreign minister of Russia, calls out the lies of the Atlanticist imperialists. Uh, this is a fascinating thing. Russia is visibly becoming more and more perturbed, let's say, with the American hybrid war on them, with the sanctions and so forth, the unfair quality of these sanctions because they are sanctions based on lies, based on imperialist lies. Um, and they have said just in the last couple of months that they are going to take the kid gloves off, that they're not going to bend over backwards as they've done in the past, trying to accommodate the Americans, which seems to have elicited the response from the American empire of more and more and more of the same, more bullying, more sanctions, more hybrid asymmetrical warfare against Russia. And so they are pretty miffed. And as a result, Russia's very well-known foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, he's one of my heroes, by the way. I really think highly of Lavrov. He met on this past Sunday with the European Union's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell. Borrell visited Moscow, and Borrell said afterwards he had conveyed the EU's unhappiness with the jailing of Navalny. Quote, I have conveyed to Minister Lavrov our deep concern and reiterated our appeal for his release and the launch of an impartial investigation of his poisoning, he said. But his remarks were overshadowed by Sergei Lavrov's forceful rebuke, in which he repeated his doubts about the West's conclusion that Navalny was poisoned with a military grade nerve agent, a conclusion that German Chancellor Angela Merkel personally announced in Berlin, where Navalny was treated. Overall, it was a disastrous performance by Borrell. And I am reading here from an article by Moon of Alabama, which appeared in Information Clearinghouse. You can look for informationclearinghouse.com, I think it is, to find that. And the article is entitled, The EU is an Unreliable Partner, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov says. Anyway, Lavrov summed up by saying, we are getting used to the fact that the European Union are trying to impose unilateral restrictions, illegitimate restrictions, and we proceed from the assumption at this stage that the European Union is an unreliable partner, Lavrov said. I hope that the strategic review, the European Council will be meeting in March to do a strategic review. And Lavrov says, I hope that the strategic review that will take place soon will focus on key interests of the European Union, and that these talks will help to make our contacts more constructive. Adding an exclamation point to Borrell's troubled visit, Russia expelled 3 EU diplomats from Germany, Poland, and Sweden for attending demonstrations in support of Navalny, an EU diplomat said. Of course, that's really a no-no in diplomatic. You know, it's not done in diplomatic circles to attend when you're an ambassador to a country to attend the opposition rallies and encourage them, that's considered interfering in meddling. And it is meddling in another country's internal affairs. So this, I was encouraged by this. I've been saying for a long time, a lot longer than they have been doing so, that Russia and China, for that matter, need to take the kid gloves off and to forthrightly head-on address this American imperialist belligerence and bullying, because when you don't meet it head-on, it shows weakness to the Americans, and the Americans, the American imperialists, the imperialists in Washington, D.C. who run America, they think in these, dog eat dog terms of weakness is something we can pounce on. And so this is an enablement. It's an encouragement by Russia and China when they're, trying to be diplomatic and bend over backwards to accommodate the other side and, consider the other side's point of view, blah, blah, blah. Fuck that shit. Seriously. That's not the way to do business with the American empire. If you are being threatened by the American empire, you've got to threat back. And it's got to be credible threats. Those are my opinions. Looking more and more like Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin are starting to come over to my side of thinking. Rainer?
This makes sense, since we've been in the situation in this last decade where Cold War escalations have kept happening relentlessly. It doesn't matter who's president. Washington just keeps adding on the sanctions and the interference and the information warfare and the proxy warfare. And now these diplomats, they do this. And I wonder what these diplomats were expecting when they did this. Perhaps they were hoping that Russia would roll over for them. And if so, they got they got a lot more than what they expected.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a change in Russia too, because for decades the Americans have been doing this, and the Russian and the Europeans. They've been they've been openly meddling in Russian affairs, as opposed to what the Americans allege about Russia doing that to them. The difference is that Russia has not really done that to them. There's no evidence showing that Russia has done that to the American imperialists, interfering in their elections, blah, blah, blah. But the Americans openly do that and have for decades and decades. I mean, I was just showing someone earlier last week the cover of Time magazine from 1996, where Time magazine has this big ugly caricature of then Russian President Yeltsin, the drunken buffoon Yeltsin, who was basically a puppet of the Clinton regime. And they were boasting about how they got Yankees come to the rescue. That was the headline. Yankees come to the rescue, to Yeltsin's rescue. And so the idea was that the Yankees got Yeltsin reelected in 1996. And of course, it was true. They weren't lying on that. they were absolutely true that they meddled in Russian elections, just like they have attempted every fucking election since Russia became since the Russian Federation became a country back in 1992, early 1992. So yeah, it's irksome on so many levels. Okay, anything else on that?
No.
Good. We can move on to anti-communism. I'm sorry, anti-communist propaganda serves to demobilize the masses. Rainer Shea, take it away.
Right. I'm observing the situation we're in, where there's an ever intensifying paradigm of falling wages, of engineered mass unemployment, of austerity, of privatization, of monopolization that goes along with this intrusion of corporate power, corporate mass surveillance, and a war machine that's right now perpetuating the acceleration of austerity in the COVID-19 era. And while Americans are subjected to these conditions, there's this ideological poison that they're being fed, which is designed to demobilize them, to steer them away from revolutionary socialism, from a real revolutionary consciousness. And this pertains to war propaganda. I've observed that educating people properly on foreign policy, on geopolitics, when it comes to countries like China and the DPRK and Cuba, and the real history of the USSR, these are the types of information that can very easily radicalize a democratic socialist to a full-on Marxist-Leninist, because they no longer believe the BS about Xinjiang genocide and Kim Jong-un is a dictator, so on. But the imperialists don't like that. They don't like how easy it can be to flip these Bernie bros into so-called tankies who uphold the immortal science of Marxism-Leninism. They don't like that, so they entrap the masses in a perpetual series of lies about the torment of the Uyghurs. That's what the Economist recently put out their dramatic headline with red barbed wire. I think it was colored red. It would make sense if they did something so over the top. They're perpetually putting out these manipulative statements to keep U.S. liberals and progressives on the side of U.S. imperialist ideological hegemony, so that they'll keep themselves trapped in this ever worsening paradigm of neoliberal kleptocracy and exploitation.
Yeah, the religion of anti-communism, it's deeply ingrained in the American psyche. It has been for a long time, although it has also deteriorated quite a bit. Looking on the positive side, polls show that Americans aren't quite buying it anymore. Not at the same level as Americans did in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. This anti-communist propaganda garbage, this religion, as Vitchek called it, that was a great article too. It's definitely deteriorated quite a bit. Most young people, youth, 18 to 30, for example, no longer buy the whole anti-communist garbage. They don't buy the idea that we should be going to war over these ideological concerns. They don't buy the idea that competition from other countries equals something that you should risk the whole fucking world, the whole future of humanity over, risk nuclear holocaust over. I mean, the figures in the last decade have been astounding as far as how many people, 50% of that youth category, 18 to 30, more than 50%, over 50%, I should say, for the last 10 years consistently have said that they lean socialist, that they consider themselves socialist. Now, as I've always said, that the first step on that journey is usually social democracy. It's usually, like you said, the Bernie Bros and that kind of thing, but it's a journey. Yeah, you're a young person, Rainer. You've gone through this journey. You've experienced it. You've lived through it. You're a shining example of the end result. You're a far-thinking person, an advanced thinker, part of the vanguard. But as things get worse, as the radicalization of the American working class progresses, and as the deterioration of the American hegemony and the American empire progresses, more and more people will be looking to revolutionary ideas. And that's why it's important. Shows like ours, the Revolutionary Socialist Review, and revolutionary socialist political parties, communist political parties, some of them are called. Actually, most of the revolutionary socialists are called. It's important that they're there to answer questions that these young people have. Even among the oldsters, people like me, and in my generation, I'll tell you the figure. When I was your age, 10% of the American public considered themselves socialists. That's quite a bit different from today. Among my generation, 10% considered themselves socialists. I know because I was there and I was a socialist. I was a revolutionary socialist, and it was lonely back then. It's not quite so lonely now. So yeah, this anti-communist shit, it has exactly the effect that your article describes, and it's insidious, and it still has a grip on many people in the United States. But we're making huge progress. The radicalization is making huge progress. So there's the yin and the yang, the positive and the negative in that story. Okay, anything more on anti-communist propaganda?
What if you called radicalization radicalization? I once called it that totally by mistake on Twitter, but it worked perfectly. I replaced the A with the E.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love it. Radicalization. I'm going to steal that, if you don't mind. I'll start using it. We'll proliferate that idea of radicalization. That's perfect. I need to get myself a red cap for that. Yeah, that's tremendous. I like that a lot. Okay. Next, another one from Rainer Shea. The U.S. and Israel are tyrannical. That's certainly the truth of all truths in this world today. When the U.S. empire is the greatest threat to the future of humanity in the history of humanity. The U.S. and Israel are tyrannical, not China and the DPRK, which is North Korea. That's the official, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is the official name of North Korea. Americans typically know it as North Korea. Anyway, Rainer Shea, this is another one by you, so take it away and let's hear what you've got to say.
It's notable the nature of the propaganda that we're fed about China and the DPRK in particular, because I feel like they perfectly mirror all of the truths about the United States and Israel. By this I mean China and the DPRK are portrayed as the two paragons of necropolitics, of tyrannical rulership. China is portrayed as a belligerent imperialist force that's putting its people in concentration camps and has created a horrifying police state which enforces forced labor, horrible manufacturing sector exploitation. And the DPRK is portrayed as a tyrannical dictatorship that puts ethnic minorities in concentration camps, and that shouldn't even be viewed as legitimate because of all the terrible atrocities that it continuously commits. And it's incredible the irony of this, because the United States and Israel respectively mirror what they paint China and the DPRK as being. And all of these accusations that they level against these two countries are totally baseless. Even the one about Chinese exploitation in the manufacturing sector, an academic study that my article links to has found that this idea is a myth, and there's no video or photographic evidence of any of the atrocities that the DPRK is accused of. On the other hand, there's continuous video and photographic evidence of Israel abusing, killing, mistreating the Palestinians under its occupation. Israel has created the world's largest open-air concentration camp in Gaza, where people are deprived of food, water, and medical care and subjected to perpetual bombings and shootings of civilians. The Palestinians living under Israel's jurisdiction are subject to extreme state authoritarianism, where there's checkpoints and severe movement restrictions and police, quasi police forces who continuously abuse them. It's really the kind of horror that we're told North Korea represents, and of course the United States is everything that we're told China represents, which is to say concentration camps, cruel exploitation of workers, a brutal police state, a terrifying surveillance state, and imperial.
Yeah, the contrasts certainly are astounding, aren't they? Between the hypocrisy, the contrast between the U.S. I mean, I don't consider Israel anything more than, as former Secretary of State Alexander Haig once said, Israel is an American aircraft carrier planted in the middle of the Middle East. And I think that's the perfect description of what Israel is for, what the Zionist state occupying Palestine is for the American empire. It's a projection of direct American imperial power into the oil-rich southwestern Asia. So I don't consider them any real player on their own. They're just a puppet, essentially, a dangerous, really dangerous puppet, a puppet with an M16. But the U.S. empire definitely, I mean, it's tyrannical. Absolutely. We've seen that. We've seen it with you know, them sending in federal police agents in black uniforms with no insignia, no badges, no identification at all, black bagging protesters in Portland not too long ago, literally like they do in like they did in Fallujah in Iraq, capturing these people, throwing black bags over them and kidnapping them. That's tyrannical. That's tyranny. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's not what you and I as Euro Americans, we don't experience a lot of what just the average black American experiences today, or brown American, vis-a-vis the American police state. And it's no wonder that literally tens of millions of Americans of all stripes of life, of all classes, of all colors, of all ethnicities, came out over this last three quarters of a year, protesting the American police state. It's amazing, and yet they project all that. They claim that that is what China or the DPRK is, which is it's not even the pot calling the kettle calling the pot black. It's it's far worse than that, because this is the blackened pot, talking to the brand new shiny pot, totally clean. And yet they project what they are, their tyranny, onto them. Well done job once again, Rainer. Next on our list, Strategic Command Chief, U.S. This is the U.S. Strategic Command Chief. Says the U.S. must consider the possibility of great power competition, crisis, or direct armed conflict with a nuclear capable peer. That's a direct quote from this guy. This guy is his name is, let me get it here. His name is Admiral Charles A. Richard. He is the head of strategic command for the U.S. For the Pentagon, for the U.S. military, and according to Alan McLeod, there's another one from Alan McLeod at mintpressnews.com. So you can go look at Mint Press News for this great article, which was published on February 5th, just last week, in Mint Press News. And Alan says, writing in the U.S. Naval Institute Journal, Admiral Charles A. Richard warned that the military must consider the possibility of great power competition, crisis, or direct armed conflict with a nuclear capable peer, and update and modernize its approach to its two principal adversaries. And of course, this guy, Admiral Charles A. Richard, he's talking about starting a fucking nuclear holocaust, a nuclear exchange, a nuclear war, because that's what direct armed conflict with a nuclear capable peer would be. To go on, there is a real possibility that a regional, and this is a direct quote from Admiral Richard, there is a real possibility that a regional crisis with Russia or China could escalate quickly to a conflict involving nuclear weapons, he wrote. demanding that the United States prepare for the conflict we prefer instead of the one we are likely to face. Richard accused China of making technological leaps in capabilities in every domain. So China's very technologically advanced. That's his accusation. And Russia of aggressively modernizing its nuclear forces. He concluded that the probability of nuclear use is low, but not impossible, particularly in a crisis as our nuclear armed adversaries continue to build capability and exert themselves globally, and that the US risks suffering embarrassment or worse if they do not. The Admiral's words closely echo a recent report from the Atlantic Council, which was our first topic tonight. A body that is filled with top American generals and closely linked to NATO. So there you have it, Rainer. This is one more example of the high and mighty in Washington, D.C. Now that President Biden has become the American emperor, calling for, pushing for, promoting nuclear war, insane as that is.
It's something that the U.S. has seemingly been tentatively, you could say, flirting with for this last decade, since Obama's pivot to Asia happened, since the Cold War with Russia was, you could argue, restarted in 2014 with the fascist Ukraine coup that started a proxy war with Russia on behalf of Washington. These escalations have gone along with attempts to rationalize the idea of nuclear war, or you could say rationalize the fact that Washington is greatly increasing the potential for nuclear war. Last week we talked about how the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists says that that we're now closer than ever. It's now likelier than ever that nuclear war will happen. We're 100 seconds to midnight in the scale of war risk for nuclear war, which is compared to 2 minutes to midnight a couple years ago, which was the highest it's been, I think, since 1953, which puts things into perspective. There's an arms race going on that's more dangerous than that of the most dangerous points of the Cold War, the 20th century Cold War. And the national security state is trying to justify this seemingly by acting like Washington is simply responding to an extreme series of provocations by Russia and China. They act like this is the only thing that the United States could ever possibly do. And, you know, they're not wrong. This is the nature of the United States. This is the nature of imperialist reaction.
Yes, absolutely the nature of imperialist reaction. It's frightening to me because although I don't think that they're stupid enough to deliberately intend to start a nuclear war, these things can quickly spiral out of control. And we've seen it in the past. The only thing that stops them is the consideration that they will also be wiped out. Most of them anyway. So last on our list tonight, big news from Ecuador. Of course, Ecuador was one of the red tide, pink tide, they called it, countries in South America. It's right at the northern most part of South America. And the past president, Correa, who was president until 2 years ago, was quite a radical, and he was very simpatico with other socialist countries in Latin America, like Nicaragua, Venezuela, so on and so forth, Bolivia. And then he promoted his vice president to be his successor, Lenin Moreno. Ironic, the name, the first name, full of irony. And Lenin Moreno ran as a successor to President Correa, and he won on that basis. In other words, on the basis of the working class in Ecuador thinking that he was going to be like President Correa. But as soon as he got in, he switched. He turned into a turncoat, 24, what it was, a 360 degrees, spin around and aligned with American imperialism. And Ecuador has been suffering ever since. Ecuador has suffered from a great increase of fascist tendencies. This guy, Lenin Moreno, reminds me a lot of Mussolini in Europe a century ago, because Mussolini, had been the editor of the Socialist Party's national newspaper. He was a leading socialist, and then he turned fascist. He not just turned fascist, he invented the word fascism. He invented the idea of this new kind of ultra racist, ultra nationalist political party. And that has been Lenin Moreno's MO here. It's almost as though he had been an understudy had been studying Mussolini. But anyway, in Ecuador, the first round of the Ecuadorian presidential election happened, and Andres Arus, I think that's the way his name is pronounced, Arus, who was a protege of former President Rafael Correa, won the election as the top vote getter, but he didn't get a clear majority. Many parties running. So he will be advancing to the, I think it's April 7th. April 11th runoff election. However, another candidate, also a person who used to be a leftist, Yaku Perez, who's comes from a left political party, but has turned right wing, and is supported by the American government, by the right wing of Ecuador. He came in second place, so he will be most likely, I think, in the runoff against the left candidate, Andres Arus. Meanwhile, prior to the election, where is it here? Let's see if I can find this. Prior to the election, the outgoing president, Lenin Moreno, he started going through a whirlwind of a scramble to privatize the country's central bank and to privatize many other crucial parts of the country. He fast tracked an emergency law that was dubbed the Humanitarian Support Organic Law, which would lock down the central bank, siphon it from the public sector, and place Ecuador's financial sovereignty at the whims of private interests. So, in other words, his outgoing move was to attempt to sabotage Ecuador's economy even more than it has already been sabotaged by Lenin Moreno's poor economic showing. The South American nation is currently suffering through its worst economic crisis in decades. Poverty is skyrocketing, corruption is rampant, and the US-backed government, the outgoing US-backed government, has shown itself to be deeply undemocratic, at least according to Ben Norton from the Gray Zone. You can go to thegrayzone.com and find his articles and videos. And Ben Norton has been in Ecuador over this time, over this electoral period and through the election, so that he could report on what was going on there. And his reports are really, really important, I think, really illustrative, and show why so much of the working class in Ecuador supported the socialist candidate Andres Aruz in this election, and why Andres Aruz is probably, it's looking good that he's probably headed to becoming the next president and displacing, removing Lenin Moreno, the incredibly ironically named Lenin Moreno. So there you have it. Latest news from Ecuador, and I think it's really important. It's shows that Latin Americans struggle to move towards democracy, towards socialism, is continuing, that the class struggle is continuing. And it also shows the existing power of the American hegemony, the American empire, especially in Latin America, which was the start of the American empire, where the first foreign lands that the American empire conquered outside of the contiguous 48, as they call it. Of course, I mean, you can make a claim that imperialism existed for a long time prior to that, when they were marching their way across America, genociding Native Americans and Mexicans as well. However, the age of imperialism, as distinct from the age of colonialism, is pretty much considered to be the cutoff that Lenin talks about in his important work, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And that is usually by experts considered to have started in 1898. And at that time was the very time when America was entrenching itself in Latin America, which they considered their backyard, so to speak, as they always called it, and starting their globe-spanning empire which of course expanded far, far greater than that after World War II. So there you have it.
I've been following this election, and I've concluded that after the Bolivia coup, the attempts to manufacture consent for more Latin America coups are crippled now, because everyone now knows that the Organization of American States told deliberate lies that installed a murderous anti-democratic regime in Bolivia. So now the imperialists, both in Bolivia and in Ecuador, have to lay low for now. If they were to start vilifying the current Bolivian government as authoritarian, like they were doing prior to the Bolivia coup, it would be too transparent. And if they were to start accusing the anti-IMF candidate in Ecuador of election fraud, it would be too transparent. So we're going to have to see how they'll be able to narratively justify whatever subversion attempts they try in the future. It's like they shot themselves in the foot with this botched coup in Bolivia that couldn't last more than a year.
Yeah, they don't seem to be able to get it right. Of course, I mean, they had the most bumbling, inept president ever in the history of America as their president during that time. We'll see if Biden does any better, but you know, Biden's a senile old pedophile. I kind of doubt that he's going to do any better in regards to reestablishing America's imperial hegemony over the rest of the world, America's tyranny over the rest of the world. I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll see. He's got the tools necessary. He's certainly gathered around him some, smart globalist players who will presumably kind of slowly take over from him, from the inept, senile president. And they've got the top cop in the wings, Kamala Harris, waiting to step in. And she's certainly a lot swifter, a lot smarter, and a lot younger than Biden. So who knows where this is going to go. Ultimately, though, in Latin America, I think they've already lost their hegemony. More and more countries in Latin America are just looking and saying, you know, why in fuck are we allowing the Americans to rip us off, to massively suck the lifeblood out of our countries? We'll see. We'll see how it goes, but I'm optimistic. I've got to say, I'm more optimistic than I have ever been in my entire life. And I think that there's good objective reason for us now to be more optimistic, because things are starting to improve for the working class as far as our political consciousness, as far as our becoming socialist, as far as our rejecting the institutions of capitalism. So we'll see. Anything else before we depart?
No, but other than that, I'm glad to hear you're so optimistic. Just to hear this coming from somebody who's been in this for like a half century.
Yeah, I think there's lots of reasons for optimism. That's no guarantee just because I'm optimistic. It's no guarantee, but there's never a guarantee. What there is the struggle. If we continue struggling, we will win. We might lose a lot beforehand, but we will win if we keep struggling. As the Maoists used to say, dare to struggle, dare to win. Right?
Right.
Okay. With that, I want to thank Rainer, as always. Yeoman's job there, Rainer. This time around, I think we had a real good discussion tonight, and hope that everyone tuning in got something out of it and enjoyed it too. Hopefully we can be a little entertaining as well as extremely informative. So with that, also, I'd like to thank all of you out there listening in and watching. Keep coming back for more. We'll be back next week. Until then, I bid you all, as Shakespeare said, I bid you all sweet adieu.